Hey there everybody, welcome to another episode of Bert's Bike. Today we are looking at my BMW R18, and specifically we are doing a 500 mile review because I just took this all the way from Nashville down to Barber Vintage Motorcycle Museum, and I'm only 30 miles from Nashville, and I thought this would be a good time to get this review done. So first off, I just can't get over the styling of this bike. I mean, it just looks amazing, from the BMW logo, from the engine sticking out, to the fishtail pipes. I mean, everything about it looks amazing. It looks commanding, and it's just a big presence on the road or in a parking lot. Another thing I love about this motorcycle is that all the wires and stuff are neatly tucked away. There's nothing really hanging down or in the way of the bike that doesn't need to be there. The only thing that I found is this SAE cable here. And I think the bike also has its own charger, so I think it's just something the dealer puts in here. So I put 500 miles on this bike, and I'm due for my 600 mile oil change. So I may or may not do it myself, but I may get the dealer to do the first one and then kind of take over after that. I don't know, we'll see. Anyway, let's jump on the bike and talk about how this motorcycle is to ride 500 miles in. All right, let's do it. Woo! Yeah. Oh. All right, it has done that a couple times actually. Every new bike I have has actually done what you just saw, which is called a flame out, I guess. But typically happens on new bikes during the early stages of ownership, and then typically that gets less and less or goes away. But of course, when I'm shooting a video, it's flaming out here. Let's talk about the weight of this motorcycle. So it is very heavy, especially for a cruiser with no frills on it. It's pretty heavy, so you know, it's pushing 800 pounds. And what most people say is once you get moving, that all disappears. And that is true to a degree, and I'll explain myself here. So in standard mode, the throttle isn't abrupt or catchy or anything like that, so it makes the bike a little predictable at first. But what I have noticed is it is a little sluggish off of first gear. It's a little sluggish off of first gear off the line. I'm feeling like I have to give it more throttle than I'm used to with other motorcycles. So the sweet spot for this bike, I think, is about 2500 just for regular cruising. And in this standard mode, the roll, if you're used to riding more sportier bikes, the roll-on power, it happens, and it's fun when it happens, but it just rolls on. Right? Oh yeah, and you can feel that torque just kind of sit you back, but it's almost like a slow burn into it versus, you know, immediate, like kind of push yourself back in the seat kind of thing. Now, I'm used to bikes that have a cable throttle, so that's probably where the disconnect for me is. Haha, no pun intended. I'm used to that immediate tactile feel of the cable. I prefer bikes with a cable throttle. However, you know, with a ride-by-wire motorcycle, you are able to have some amenities that you wouldn't normally have, which specifically is cruise control. So on this trip, cruise control came in super handy. I really just, you know, set it and forget it, and it's actually really smooth and not abrupt. You know, when you roll on and roll off or hit the resume button, it's really smooth. So let's get back to the weight of this motorcycle. So it feels very, very planted to the ground, you know, at almost any speed. And it is just one heavy German whale of a motorcycle. You are just planted to the road on this bike. Also, because the suspension is more on the firm side, I would call it taut suspension. You really do feel the road underneath you, but not in a bad way. You can feel, you know, the sort of makeup of the road. Is it a really smooth road, or is it a road that's kind of you know, a little bit rocky. You can feel what's happening underneath you, instead of just sort of the lazy boy feel. But what that more firm suspension translates into is the ability to take this bike around corners and have it hold that line, right? So coming around here, you can really, it just holds this line really well, and you don't get that wallowy sensation that you get with bikes with softer suspension. Now, if you've ever owned a foreign car, the suspension is typically tighter. I've owned a VW Passat and Golf, and those cars always felt like they were hugging the road. Part of that is the rigid build, and some might even say over-engineered, but I like the feeling of robustness and quality, and I think that a lot of Harley-Davidson riders really like that feeling of Harley's robust build quality. So I think that is a positive for this motorcycle. Another thing too is if you're buying a cruiser, if you're in the cruiser market, you're not too concerned about really how heavy the bike is, especially if you've been riding for a while. You're not too concerned with just weight of the motorcycle. You're more concerned about the feel, the styling, and also can it haul a bunch of things. You want to be able to be cruising on this bike for long periods of time in comfort and stability, especially if you're on the highway. So I think when it comes to cruisers, I think the weight is actually a big plus in my book. It feels heavy when you're picking the bike up off the stand, but when you get used to kind of the rigidity of it and how it feels to move around, slow speed maneuvers end up being pretty easy on this motorcycle. Now, there is a caveat to that, is if I haven't dropped the bike yet, but I can tell if you push this bike past the tipping point, it's going to be pretty hard to keep it from tipping over. You can whip this thing around once you get used to the weight of it and how it handles, how it feels, all that stuff. And thankfully, BMW put dual discs on the front, and the brakes do feel really good. That's where the weight comes back into the equation, is when you are trying to stop this thing in a hurry. You really do feel, you know, that you are riding on a pretty heavy machine. Now, people who ride, you know, CVOs and big Harley Tourers and baggers and the BMW Transcontinental, you know, all these huge motorcycles, like, this isn't gonna be anything new for them. But for me, you know, the heaviest bike in my garage I owned was the Indian Chief, and it was a lot lighter than this bike. But the bikes that I own currently are a Triumph Bonneville and a Z900 RS, and those are, you know, they're under 500 pounds. This is significantly more mass underneath you when you're riding. It does feel really good cruising at high speeds as well. So if you're on the highway with this thing, if you're not looking at your speedometer, you could be going 80, 85, and it doesn't really feel like it other than the wind noise. Now on my other bikes, they'll definitely do 80, 85, 90, 100, over 100 or whatever, but once you get to the 80 mark on those other two bikes, it feels like you're going very, very fast. And on this motorcycle, it really holds its composure when you're going those higher speeds. So if I'm planning on taking this bike on longer highway runs, I would probably put a quick release windshield on this to where I could probably just take it off when I got to my destination and do the in-town riding without it. I could see how people could prefer having a windscreen for those higher speeds and also for longer distance travel. There's a couple things about the controls that are just a little bit hard to get used to. It's the cruise control, really. You have this rocker switch with a paddle on there, and I like the idea of that rocker switch because it locks the cruise control when you don't want it, or it prevents you from accidentally turning it on, which I think is great. However, it's just kind of an awkward place because you have to kind of like rotate your wrist up here to push it. I feel like if they pushed it back a little bit to here, would have been almost perfect. But, you know, that's just a small thing. Now, the big standout feature for this motorcycle is the boxer twin engine, and inherently with the design, you get these two kind of asymmetrical jugs sticking out. The left one is actually further forward than the right one. The right one is further backward. So that's something I just noticed when I was looking at the bike from the hotel room I was staying at. I was like, oh, they're asymmetrical. But in my mind, when I think about the bike, everything is in line and symmetry. The ergonomics on this bike, for me, I'm 6'1", I have a 32-inch inseam. I weigh about 185 pounds, and the actual bend of the bar, the hand grips are kind of really long. It is just a very comfortable place to be for the long haul. What about your forward controls? Like, you don't have any forward controls. Honestly, I don't really like forward controls a whole lot. I like them as an option, but I don't like them as the primary position. So if I got some highway bars, I might put some highway pegs on there just for the option of stretching my legs out on a really long haul. But for the most part, you know, it didn't really bother me. The seating position, in my opinion, is a pretty neutral one. So it's a position where I don't think it where your back doesn't suffer so much. And what I like about this position versus some other bikes and other cruisers I've ridden is a lot of cruisers, you know, yes, the seat is low, but it's low and sort of tilted. So what it does, it puts a lot of pressure on your tailbone, and that is what really gets uncomfortable. The bike that comes to mind that I've owned is the Indian Scout, and although it's such a cool stance, all your weight is kind of on your tailbone area. The stock seat that came with mine, it's a firm seat, but honestly, for long haul riding, you need something kind of firm, because what happens with soft seats is that it squishes down and squishes down over a long ride, and what ends up happening is you end up, you know, feeling the underpan and the sort of mounting points of the seat when you don't have kind of a firm enough seat. I typically like to take breaks, you know, every 60 to 100 miles, and on older cruises that I've had, on that 100-mile mark or 60, 70, 80 mark, I'm kind of ready to be off the bike for a little while. But with this bike, I get off, put some gas in, go use the bathroom, come back, and I'm ready to go for another 100 miles. So the trip to Barber was 200 miles down and 200 miles back. And honestly, I feel like I could keep riding all day with the way that not only the seat is on this bike, but the whole ergonomic package on this. This is kind of my ideal position, sitting position, and all that for a cruiser. Like, it's really ideal for someone of my build. Alright, let's talk about a couple things that I maybe don't like so much about the motorcycle. Kind of a like and dislike as well. I like the look of this matte paint. In this green flake color, it gives the bike a really understated but kind of a tougher look. However, with matte paint, it is more susceptible to scratching and scuffing and rubbing and all that kind of stuff. So I love and I hate it, because I really want to put a tank bag on this, but I know as soon as I do, I'm gonna be scuffing up that paint really badly. And the second day I owned this bike, I drove it to work, and when I came out, I had a little ding in the tank already from, I guess, a rock chip or something hit the bike when I was riding it to work. But over time, that's fine. I think it'll create some nice patina for the bike. But that's not really a problem with BMW or the paint. It's just a problem with matte paint in general. The other thing that I had to fix right away on the bike is, if you're planning on riding this bike not just for show and actually take it and do places and bring things with you, you really have to figure out some kind of luggage solution to where you can carry a bag or two at least. So a big feature of this bike obviously is the boxer twin engine and the way it sits in the motorcycle. And a lot of people always ask or always wonder, does you feel a lot of heat coming off of these jugs? And honestly, I haven't even thought about it one bit on the ride. Like, I just don't feel the heat that radiates off of the engine like I did on my Harley or on my Indian, or, you know, even my Z900 or Bonneville. I just don't feel that radiating heat sensation. And I think, you know, it's just because both cylinders are getting cooled equally and they're both in the wind at all times, so it doesn't really get the opportunity to just get scalding hot. Admittedly too, this is my first BMW motorcycle, my first boxer engine, and it's been really interesting getting to know its personality and its different shakes and sounds and all that. And you know, compared to any bike that I've ridden, it is a really interesting and full of character motor. I mean, you know, another bike that comes to mind that's full of character is my old Harley Roadster. And I'm also a really big fan of inline fours like my Z900 RS. That thing is just insane. But it's just a different character. This bike, this boxer engine, I would say it's characterful, but it's more on the quirky side, you know? The other thing talk about is, you know, these stock pipes, because you're either in the love it or hate it camp. And I'll tell you, man, I'm in the love it camp. I love the way they look. Do I wish they were a little louder? Yes. Would I rather buy the same exact exhaust aftermarket and just then be a little louder, or go for a different style? I am kind of secretly waiting for somebody to come out with a mod for these, or a company to make pretty much an exact replica of them and just make them a little louder, because you can tell, and if you've searched around some videos, the guys that do change out their exhaust, the engine sounds really great. Alright, so when you're doing a slow speed turn uphill like I just did, that's where that kind of laggy throttle, you really got to be intentional with that, or you probably stall the bike out like I did on my first ride home with it. Yeah, another thing to talk about is, do the jugs get in the way of your feet? Yes, at first they do. They get in the way of your feet. However, you get used to it. Now, the one caveat of that is if you are wearing some big combat boot type shoes or some wedge shoes, it is a kind of a tight space there, because yes, you can adjust the clutch up or down, but when you adjust it up, you're losing clearance for the downshift, and vice versa. So I have a pair of wedge shoes that I wear for work a lot of times, and I have to kind of do this thing where I go around and up to shift. That's a small thing, is the kickstand. The way it folds up, you do end up resting your back heel on the actual kickstand a lot of times. And I've put, you know, like I said, around 500 miles on this bike now, and I still do it. Also on the right side, sometimes the back of my boot sits against the exhaust or whatever that is next to it. The average mile counter on the computer on this road trip, I was averaging 47 miles to the gallon. That was mainly back roads, but on the last, you know, 70-80 miles, it was interstate, so that's a really good average. 148.7 divided by 3.063 gallons. Sure. Alright, that's an average of 48.5. Yeah, and I guess to sum it all up, this bike is more of a slow burn. It's not something that when you first go on, you know, these 10-15 minute test rides, that you don't really understand it and get to know what it's all about until you put, you know, quite a few miles on it. The BMW R18, the slow burn. Thanks so much for watching. Please like and subscribe. Leave a comment below. It's Bert's Bike, and I'll catch you on the next one.